So thank you for taking some time for the interview. Tonight you're going to talk about the meaning of labor, right? So could you please define meaning at first?
Der Sinn, der Sinn.
Der Sinn, yeah.
Yeah, Sinn. Well, what I'm going to talk about is social elements in work, particularly cooperation, which I've just written a book about, and which will come out in Germany in 5 months. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to focus on what went wrong with a lot of the social processes in work and what we could do about them.
During what time?
Well, the last in the last period, since the kind of neoliberal transformation of work.
Okay. Since the 1990s?
1980s, 1990s, yeah. Because this is a very broad change. I mean, basically, what neoliberalism did was take apart long-term relations in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And your country is one of the last to feel those effects. It's much more pronounced in Southern Europe and, of course, in Britain and America.
Which are these effects?
Well, they basically have to do with short-term time relations in work with people who don't work in a firm for their whole lives. They don't have a work narrative in a firm. They rather have kind of transactions that are much shorter term, and it erodes. It has a really quite negative effect on relations in the workplace and productivity, because people aren't committed to firms in the same way. I think for Germans, it's hard to imagine the deteriorated work conditions, say, in a place like the United States, where people don't expect to be able to survive in a firm, where they expect to be fired, where they leave rather than are pushed, where there's a kind of constant churning of labor. But what I'm going to focus on tonight is some positive aspects of a more durable kind of work situation. I'm going to try and explain what those are.
What are these negative effects on people actually when they don't have long-term contracts anymore, when they have to be more flexible and never know when the next project comes?
Well, there are 3 big ones that occur. The first is that levels of mutual trust sink in workplaces, that people become much more individualistic. They don't think they can rely on other people. And there's a good reason for that, since people are moving in and out of firms quickly. There's not the time to develop that kind of mutual trust. And the kind of logic of a lot of modern management is to keep teams of people together for very short-term times on projects. 7 to 8 months is the maximum recommended. So people are constantly, and they're usually in big firms like Microsoft or Apple, there are teams of people, and the teams are competing against each other. And this kind of winner-take-all situation where the teams that do the best work get amply rewarded. And many of the people in the so-called losing teams, even though they worked hard, if they haven't been as productive, are often let go from the firm. So what you get is a situation in which people are, as we say in English, watching their back. Mm-hmm. They're more interested in deniability and in survival if they're not one of the winners. So that erodes trust. We're also seeing a kind of new kind of can I put it, a kind of almost play acting of cooperativeness, where people learn all the sort of social nuances of being cooperative, but they're actually not cooperating because they don't have a joint fate with each other.
How does it look like?
Well, it looks like what you get in a firm is, if you were an American, you would learn in business school how to shake hands with somebody else. You would learn appropriate behavior to how to dress appropriately for a situation. You'd learn kind of the surface techniques of sociability. But actually, if somebody else needs you in a difficult situation, the tendency would be to withdraw rather than help out. And this is something I've been charting for a long time. I've been studying this kind of breakdowns in cooperation since the 1980s. And there are various ways to measure it. We can see in firms that have these short-term teams in place, where people have a very individualized attitude to their work, that the level of productivity sinks. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a qualitative issue, it's also an issue about getting people to work hard.
And do you have any suggestions?
And the third of these, since you asked me about this, has to do with authority. And one of the interesting things that's happening in the modern workplace is that managers are seen to be less and less legitimate as managers. One study, which is cited in my new book, says that about 60% of the employees in British firms today think that their managers are less competent than themselves. And there's again a structural reason for this. The rates of mobility in and out of jobs get to be higher the higher up you go in a corporation. So if you're a middle-level employee, you may be in a job 2 or 3 years. If you're a top manager, you may be moving around much more than that. So that people feel that they're not getting witnesses for their work. And they tend, firms that operate in this fast revolving door tend to rely on sort of bureaucratic records for promotion or demotion or judgment, rather than face-to-face because of this instability.
What do you mean by witness of work?
What I mean is that if you were in the financial services industry, you'd more likely stay in your job longer than your boss. And that means that when it came time to evaluate you, the chances that the boss you started with was still there would be low. And it creates a kind of trauma about leadership, because the bosses are not committed to the employees below them. And again, in my new book, this is something that I and my researchers looked at in the financial industry since the breakdown of the collapse of 2008. Do you know the expression in English, marooned? Do you know what that means?
Say again?
Marooned, do you know what
No,
that expression? It means you're the boat sinks and you're the last one on the boat, or you're on an island. And a lot of these lower level employees feel that the managers were able to save themselves, but marooned the employees below. So that's the negatives of all of this. And it's, you know, I mean, a simple way to put it is that, you know, we need to work to survive, but its meaning is becoming less central to us because of these changes in modern capitalism. It's becoming less meaningful.
Okay. So where do we focus on now?
That's what I'm going to talk about in my lecture. I won't tell you now.
Just one sentence.
I can't really do that. I mean, it's a complicated issue about rebuilding a workplace. And it has to do with changes in the culture, people's expectations about social mobility, about staying in one place. It's complicated. I can't give you a sentence. What else do you want to ask me about? Because I've talked more than 20 minutes to you already.
I would like to know...
And I want to stop talking before I have to give my talk, too.
I would like to know what kind of working environment will there be in about 10 to 20 years? Do you have any...
Well, it depends where. What did you have in mind?
In Western countries?
Well, certainly what's going to happen in Europe is that if we the only way we can solve the problem of full-time employment is by work programs that involve job sharing. We're never going to generate full-time employment for the mass of workers in Europe. And the kinds of job sharing and basic income arrangements where you split a full-time job in half and then give people income support that's a future for us. The alternative would be levels of unemployment, youth unemployment, structural youth unemployment of about 25 to 30%.
Which we already have in Spain
and Greece, without the money to do this. But it requires that the government actively, rather than pursue the fantasy of restoring the labor system of the post-war years, that the government actively intervenes to split up jobs so that people have some work and some support. And that's not a bad future, you know. But it would take a much more proactive government than certainly we have in Britain. And it would strengthen the government that the Southern Rim countries don't have now. It's why, I mean, the market is no solution to these labor problems. You know, we need to recreate a kind of strong government that intervenes with the fact that we can't support our own population as we did 30 years ago. It's just not possible. Mm-hmm. So ask me one final question.
Yes, like you might have read my questions that I sent via mail, and I
didn't.
No, you didn't. Okay, I was talking about in some European countries, as we just said, like Greece and Spain, they have highly trained young adults that never get a job. So how can jobless people still find sense in life if the political system doesn't give them the opportunity to work?
Well, it has to. And when I'm suggesting about things like job sharing is a way to do it. It's not the only. There are many, many ways to create part-time work. Taking an existing job and splitting up in half is one way to do it. Another is to devise workplaces so that the jobs are organized in such a way that people can work 20 or even 18 hours a week. But for all that, you need planning. You need a strong state that interferes, that controls. Mm-hmm. The last thing in the world you need is free market. You need socialism. And
you plead for socialism.
Well, I've always been a socialist, but I mean, what I think it means is, changed. But we're not going to get out of this by restoring the old order. That's just impossible.
Okay, and young people like me, they just have to change their focus from work to something else.
Well, you're not going to solve your own problem. I mean, it's a structural problem in the society. And so you can't do it for yourself. It takes a different kind of state. So what do you do next week? That's a different issue. But I'm saying, to take this seriously, it can't be left to what's the best strategy for finding a job. That's what young people are being told today. Mm-hmm. And that's both cruel and unworkable. It puts it back on you. What should I do next week?
Yes.
And you can't solve that problem by yourself.
Well, that's good to know.
So no guilt.